Well, I knew I should get called up because the war was going on, and I was called up at 18 years old. Well, I was posted to uh, the RAOC, uh, that is the Royal Army uh, Corps that for supplies, and I went to Inkley in Leicestershire first of all for 6 weeks training to be a soldier, and we had 6 weeks at Hinckley, and then we went from there. We were posted to Woollerton Park in Nottingham, and we were under canvas there in bell tents, and taken to Chilwell, which was a supply depot to the army, and that's where we were doing all storekeeping business and sending supplies out abroad into all units of the army. And we used to have to go from Chilwell by train every morning to the RAOC depot. You had no alternative. You were called up, and that was it. It was an automatic thing, unless you was doing a job that was essential that you stayed in that job for reasons being that you were helping the war effort. You just had to be called up, and that was it. Well, you obviously felt apprehensive about it because you knew very well that you were going in the army and anything could happen once you was in the army. You didn't know where you were going to be posted or anything at that period.
Okay.
I was later posted to Bicester, down near through Oxford, and we were at the big RAOC stores down there, a big supply depot, and I always remember I became friendly with the family down there, and they invited me to Sunday tea and things like that. We got very friendly, but I lost touch with them once we were moved. But whilst I was there, thinking back, I had an abscess on my face, and I had to have a back tooth, and I had to go to the dentist and have it out, and that was pretty rough at the time. I remember I sat in the dentist's chair, and he injected and must have put me to sleep, and I can just remember as he was going to pull my tooth out, he said, "You're doing fine, you're doing fine, you're doing fine, you're doing fine." And as I went, I was doing fine, and the faster it went, I was doing fine, doing fine, doing fine, doing fine, doing fine, and then my tooth came out, and I gradually woke up. But it wasn't a pleasant period, believe you me. But there we are, and back to Bicester, into Addismith Fields, where the hut was that we were stationed in. There was nothing ever said because it was taken for granted. You're just in the army, and what happened to you, and wherever you were, that was it. And after a period at Bicester, I was finally told I was going abroad. And I was sent home on leave first, and then I was posted to Scotland, and we went straight up to the docks in Scotland, and when we got onto the docks, we were put onto a boat, and that boat was the Durban Castle cruise ship that people used to go cruising on. It was the Durban Castle, a big cruise boat, and we went from Scotland on the river Clyde, isn't it? And there was quite a few Scotch lads on the boat, and several dived off the side of the boat and went home. They decided they were going home, they weren't going on the boat, and they swam to the shore and went home because they didn't want to go abroad. But when we finally set off, there was several other boats full of troops, and as we went down the Clyde, it was something that will stick in my mind forever. There was a little park. It was a square park on the side of the Clyde, and it was sort of square shaped with a path in the gate and round part of the park with a seat at the side of the Clyde, and there was an old lady sat there, and she was sat there watching us go down the Clyde, and she was in tears because she realised that we were going somewhere abroad that we didn't know where. We had no idea where we were going. And as we went down past the shipyard, Glasgow and that, all the workers came to the edge of the Clyde, and all the women were all in tears, but they were shouting and cheering us, and all the women lifted the skirts right up and showed us all the knickers and everything as we went down the Clyde, and then of course away we went. And we went down, obviously down, and we were the first lot of shipping to go through the Gibraltar after it had reopened. And I think we landed at, was it Tunis? I think it was Tunis we landed at. And there we stayed a day or two, only to catch a train further down the coast. We were in Tunis for a while, for a couple of days, that was all. And then we were put on the train, and we went further down the coast and down towards Alexandria. But before we got to we came to another point, I forget where it was, and we were put on another boat called the Captain Jack. It was a Free French boat, and on it there was about 300 troops and 100 officers. But before that, it had on about 1,000 troops with 300 officers, but they were all foreigners, and the food that was on board was all foreign food that was horrible, and part of it was bad. It was bad food, and that was the only food that we got at that point. And we were in hammocks going to bed at night, and nearly everybody was over the side of the ship being sick through the food that we were having. And then we made our way down to Alexandria. But on the way down, on this train as we got on, there were only cattle trucks and with sliding doors. And there was that many in each cattle truck that I was sat all the night just on the edge of where the door was closed up, and I was sat there just on the edge all the night. And we did pull up at one station, and at the other side of the rails there was an American supply train that had all food on, and we got on this train and got food off it, all tinned fruit and everything that we nicked off of this train, and took it with us back on. But the cattle trucks were that full that there was just no room really, and there we were sat on the edge of this, just on the edge of this, and other trains were coming up and down, and we were sat there just as they passed us. We landed at Alexandria, and from there we were sent up to Benghazi, and then up to Tripoli, and from there up to Tel el-Kabir. Now Tel el-Kabir was just virtually desert, and we were 22 in a bell tent, and we had to sleep and everything there. There was nothing to do. That was the place where we were posted to different units, and we were there a few days. And when we went to sleep at night, we used to put our blankets down on our ground sheet, and our mosquito net up to the middle post of the tent, and 22 slept round the tent, and the sand, all the sand were moving because there were sand bugs. But that's where you had to sleep, on that sand with your ground sheet down and your blankets, and that was it. You had no alternative but to lay there on that with sand bugs, and the sand was virtually moving. There was that many sand bugs. Afterwards, but we were posted, I was posted down to a REME LAD, that is Royal Electrical, Mechanical and Engineers, and I became REME instead of RAOC because I was attached to the REME, and I was posted to 167 London Infantry Brigade LAD, which is a light aid detachment, and that was, we had 2 stores wagons, a breakdown wagon, and 1 or 2 other vehicles, the Sergeant Major's vehicle and another vehicle besides, and I, along with a Lance Corporal that was in charge of the 2 store vehicles, was supplying any spare parts from the store vehicles to the fitters in the light aid detachment, repairing lorries and everything, anything that broke down or anything of that nature. But it wasn't at this point where we became involved in any fighting. We moved back down to Cairo, and at that point, we moved back down to Tobruk, and whilst in Tobruk there was a ship, a boat that was sunk in the middle of the harbour, and 2 or 3 of us swam out to this boat and got on board ship. But then the military police were coming round in a boat, so we had to get out quickly and swim back to the shore, otherwise we should have been in problems with the military police. And whilst we were in Tobruk, we were entertained in the square with other units that were there. There was other units besides ours that were there, and there was quite a few hundred probably soldiers that were being entertained by the Western brothers, that were well-known entertainers in this country. And there was 1 or 2 Americans there, and the Americans hadn't got a very good name for being fighters, and the Western brothers made 1 or 2 jokes about the Western brothers, and the Americans gradually floated off. They went because they didn't like what they'd heard. But that was in Tobruk, and when we were there, the only water that we had to drink was seawater that was treated specially and put in a tank and brought to us, and that was the water that we had to drink. There was no other water, and we were only allowed a certain amount of water a day. So what we used to do was, when we'd finished drinking our tea, we'd leave a drop in the bottom, the dregs, and we'd shave with that tea dregs. That's what we used with our shaving brush, and that's what we had to shave with. And the sand was so hot that my feet used to sweat terribly, and I was allowed shoes instead of army boots because I had trouble with my toes and that. So I had ordinary shoes more than anything. But it was quite an experience in Tobruk and Tripoli, because the only thing that's there is more or less desert. There's not a lot there, you know. And whilst we were in Cairo, you had to be very careful, because we called the Arabs we used to call them wogs, which stood for wily old gentlemen. And if you were on your own going down a street, you could be confronted by perhaps two come from one end of the town, or one end of the road, and two from the other end, and they could have pinched your wallet or anything. They weren't very nice people. That's something you had to put up with and sort of guard against, and go out with other people in your unit. In my unit was I think it was 13 or 15 people. Two storekeepers. There was the ASM who was in charge, and there was the Sergeant Rogers, and a corporal and a lance corporal, and the others were just ordinary private people, private soldiers, and they used to be doing repairs. The lance corporal was in charge of me in the stores, and that was our jobs. But we were doing that when we got down to Cairo, but as I say, there wasn't a lot for us to do because we wasn't amongst the fighting there. But whilst we were in Cairo, we were fortunate enough to have a padre that took us down to into Israel. And whilst I was in Israel, I had my 21st birthday, and the padre took us all round Bethlehem and these places. I was fortunate enough that he took us to the Sea of Galilee, where there was warm springs, and I actually bathed in the Sea of Galilee. I actually stood in the shaft of light where Jesus' bench was in the church, and I also touched the pillar that Mary was leaning against whilst the Holy Ghost came and told her that she was going to bear a child. And whilst I don't punch the Bible, I do go to church now, I know, but we don't punch the Bible, but unbelievably something entered my body when I touched the pillar, and this happened to some of the other soldiers that was with us, and not all of us, but there was a spirit or something that made me shudder, and we feel that it must have been something to do with the Holy Ghost. It was a queer feeling, never be able to explain really, but it's something that happened. I know it happened, and you just have to take my word for it. And he took us all round. It was very, very interesting. We went back to Cairo, and that is when we started to realise that we were going to be sent across to Italy. But I did have my 21st birthday on Mount Carmel. It was a beautiful summer's evening. The moon was shining brightly, and it was a very warm summer's evening, and the restaurant was lovely and clean, and there was tiles outside for a dance floor, and I was with a young chap slightly younger than me called Frankie Mott. Always remember him. And he had no money, and I had just enough money for a bottle of Carmel Hock. That is a wine, Mount Carmel Hock. And Frankie and me drank that bottle of Carmel Hock between us on my 21st birthday on the side of Mount Carmel. And then we went back to barracks, and there we were. But that was my 21st birthday. And whilst all the 8th Army had gone across to Italy before us, we realised that we were going to join the 8th Army and go up the east side of Italy. The Americans were going up the west side of Italy. So we went across, and that was it, to Italy. From there we were transported across by sea, obviously, to Italy. And we went up through Italy, and that is when we joined, the 8th Army was part way up the eastern side of Italy. We set up our workshops, and we were dealing with vehicles. We used to have to go up to the front line where a vehicle might be broke down or have been shelled or some whatever, and we used to have to fetch the vehicle out of the front line. We couldn't really take our rifles or anything with us because we had to work when we were there and get the vehicle attached to our breakdown vehicle and bring it back to our little workshop. So we were there to be more or less shot at any time. It was a difficult time, and well, our lives were in anybody's hands. We didn't know, but it was just a case of doing our job the best that we could. We bring the vehicle back to our workshops. If we could deal with it, we would repair it. If we couldn't deal with it, we had to take it back to divisional workshops. And if divisional workshops couldn't deal with it, they used to take it back to area workshops and deal with it there. And that's how it worked out all through the advance as we were advancing in Italy. We were going up towards Rimini, and we set our workshops up before we got to San Marino, and we were dealing there with traffic that was broken down or whatever. And then came time for us to advance. The road was a very secondary road. We pack everything onto our vehicles, stores and everything. The old workshop moved up, and as it moved up, we went forward up the secondary road. ASM's truck led the way, with the other trucks behind, and the two stores trucks behind them. before we set off, we actually, some of our soldiers happened to pinch some rabbit and a chicken from a farm, and I was on my bedding, my blankets were wrapped up in my ground sheet, and my bedding was in the back of this stores wagon, and that's where I was sat, and in the back of this wagon I had this rabbit, and I also had this chicken, which were alive. It was the intention that our cook was going to cook them for us. But as we went up this secondary road, it was all the surface was sand. You can tell what kind of a road that was. And in the side of the road was where the rain had worn the side of the roads out with little dips. And San Marino was on our left, to the west of us. And the east was obviously on the right side of our road. And we were going up this road, and there was supposed to be no Germans in San Marino, because that is a separate state, San Marino. They have their own football club now, San Marino. It wasn't part of Italy, and there was not supposed to be any Germans in that place at all. But they were, and they could see, their spies could see this road that we were going up, and we were very, very heavily shelled going up this road. The shelling got so bad that we stopped, and it was so bad that I had to get out of this truck, and I wanted to kill this rabbit and this chicken, and I held the rabbit up with its legs, back legs, brought my hand down, but I couldn't kill it, and I let it go live into the open spaces. Got the chicken, I was going to screw it neck, but I couldn't kill a chicken, so I let that go as well into the open spaces outside the truck. I was in trouble afterwards for it, but there we are. And I jumped out of the truck, and I laid with my head in this guttering at the side of the back wheel. The back wheels were double wheels, you know, and I got my head at the side of the tyre, and straight away I just got down, and the shell went off, and it burst the tyre at the side of my head, and that was that, and the shelling carried on until finally we had to make a rush for it, and the tyre flat. But fortunately it was a double wheel, so we were able to get up the road, and the whole unit, all the vehicles moved up the road, and we managed to get behind a hill that came between us and San Marino, so they couldn't see us behind this hill. Where we changed this tyre, we changed the wheel, we put the spare wheel on, and then we realised that we'd gone past our destination, which meant that we had to go back down this road so far. And each of our drivers said, we will go slowly down so that the dust from the sand didn't show up. But as each driver got on that road, they just put their foot down and flew. And we got part way down the road, each one went down and got down to where we turned left off the road, which was just a track up to a church. And we got up to this church, where the vehicles were parked, and we went in this church. And being the storekeeper and only what they called a craftsman, you weren't called a private then, you were called a craftsman. That was the name that we had, Craftsman Ashton. And the Sergeant Major said to me, right Ashton, take this board down to the bottom of the lane. So this board used to have a black cat on. That was the sign of our division, the 56th London Infantry Division. And we all had signs so that any of the units that belonged to us knew where our unit was and could bring a vehicle to us. So I had to go down this lane to the very bottom, to where this sandy road was that we'd come up and come back down. And when I got to the bottom of the lane, I was just placing the board so that it could be seen by anyone to tell them where to come. And as I was placing the board, a sniper sniped at me, and I heard the bullet whisk past my ear. You could hear it whistle past my ear. That was twice in one day. Somebody was looking after me from above. Must have been. Then that night we had to do guards, and that night we heard that 300 Germans had broke through into the valley just below us, and we doubled the guard. There was 2 of us out of the 15 soldiers guarding this church, and I got on with one of the chaps, and we were going round together, and he kept saying, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that? What was that? What was that?" And in the end I said to him, I says, "Look, you walk round one side and I'll meet you round, and then walk back round and I'll meet you round the other side," because it was so scary. And that's how we spent our 2 hours on duty that night. When my duty was finished, I went into the church where we were bedding down, and there was no beds or anything, and we had to get down on our ground sheet and blankets. And when I opened my ground sheet and blankets, it was full of shell holes. It was full of shrapnel holes. That's where I had been sat when this shell exploded. So that was 3 lives in that first more or less 36 hours. And then the next day, 2 of us, Monty and I, Monty was looked as though he was in his 60s, but he wasn't. He was a much younger man. And I wanted to do a number 2, and we had to go down the field, down the side of the little lane at the other side where there was an edge all the way down, and we dropped our trousers together and down at the edge, and in the field there was some asses like little donkeys that was with one of our units, and 1 or 2 Arabs that was with our units, and he started shelling us again from San Marino. And there's Monty and I, having done our business, running up the field pulling his trousers up. It was queer. But 1 or 2 of the Arabs and the donkeys was hit by shell fire, and there was more problems. So we were in this church, and that was where we were stationed until we were able to move further on. And when we did move further on. We went up towards Rimini, and as we entered Rimini, we had to go obviously past San Marino and further up the road, and we entered Rimini, and when we entered there was someone hung by the neck from one of the lampposts. And we took no notice of that. We carried on, and finally we came out of the line for a rest, and we went into a very big house, beautiful house it was, all tiled and everything. It was beautiful, and what we used to drink out there was vino, or what was it? There was another drink that we used to drink out there, and we, for drinking glasses, what we had to do was bottles. We used to put oil in the bottle so far up, and then we used to put a red hot poker in the bottle, in the oil, and it used to break the bottle off clean. And then we used to sandpaper the edges of the bottle, of the glass that was left, and that there were our drinking glasses. And we were in this mansion, and we had plenty of vino and this other drink that we used to have, and a lot of them was that drunk, because we'd come back out of the line and everybody was safe, that as they were leaning against the tiled walls and floors, they were just slid down on the bottoms and fell asleep, and they didn't even go to bed that night. They just slept there in this mansion, whereas where we should have been sleeping were just up the road, in the yard, in a place there. But there we were. We had a good night, and everybody enjoyed themselves, and I wasn't one that was drunk, but I had plenty to drink that night. From there we gradually moved up further north, and there was all sorts of fighting. One day I was stood on a bridge over a main road, and I could see a Danar, that is a motorcyclist soldier and he was called a Danar, and he was coming down this road, and as he was coming down, a shell was fired, and it landed each side of where he was, and he still came through it. Amazing scene really to see that happen, you know. And in our units we had 3 infantry brigades. There was the London Irish, London Scottish and the Welsh, and I was aware of one soldier, and he used to go up into the front line as an infantryman, and he said to me, he said, you know, we infantry can tell you whether we're going to come out of the line again. He says, when we go in, he says, we know beforehand whether we're coming out. I didn't believe him, and he says, the next time I go up, I shan't come out. And I did hear that was the last time he actually went up, and he didn't come out again. That is true. It's something that I can't explain, but that is perfectly true. But we were just behind the line, and we were fetching vehicles out to repair them, and that was our job. So we did see a lot of bodies in fields and animals in fields, all killed through shelling. Not a nice sight, and it's a sight that I hated, and that is the reason that I've never spoke a lot about war to my family. not a nice thing. I hated it really, but it was something that we just had to bear it and put up with. And we gradually advanced in that manner through Italy, right up the east side of the country. Lovely country we saw, but sightseeing didn't come into it. You were too busy looking after yourself and that kind of thing. Finally, we finished in Trieste. Trieste is the northern Italy, and it is also part of, on the edge of Yugoslavia. Now when we got up there, we were fortunate enough to have come out with our complete unit. Every one of our unit was still alive, which we were all very, very thankful for. And we went into workshops or stores where there was torpedoes stored, and we had to sleep in this torpedo store. There was a small office where the sergeant major slept, and the sergeant and the corporal and the lance corporal all slept, but all the rest of the craftsmen, as we were called, slept in this torpedo store. And there were huge rats, and I mean huge rats, but that was something we had to put up with. And first night we were there, the corporal came down to where we were sleeping, got us up, and he said, "Could you come and help?" I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "Well, we've got our mosquito nets down in the office in our beds, and our beds were made up so that we could pull them to pieces and fit them up wherever we were with this specially made material and bits of steel, and we used to make our own beds up." And he was laid on this bed, the lance corporal, with his mosquito net down and a rat on top of his mosquito net, and we had to, and its paws was in the net, and we had to go pick the net up so that the rat was in the bottom of the net, and smack the net against the wall to kill the rat. It was huge, but that's what we did. And we were in these were our barracks for the time being. But whilst we were there, we decided to have a trip out in this small torpedo boat, and there was 4 of us that went out to sea in this torpedo boat, and the torpedo broke down whilst we were out at sea, and it finished up with taking 2 of the floorboards up and 2 of us swimming behind the boat, pushing it back to land, and 2 of them taking the turns with the floorboards out of the boat, paddling back to shore. Then we'd get out of the sea and the other 2 would swim and we'd be paddling back to shore. We got back to shore, and the next thing we'd been there a few days, and we were told that the Yugoslav army were coming to attack us, because they thought that Trieste should belong to Yugoslavia. There was 15 of us, and we were told to dig in. And we dug trenches and dug ourselves in, and right round the bay, it was a huge bay, huge, and right round the bay we could see these hundreds of Yugoslavs coming round, not in any form, just in one big trail, and it was being led by 2 horses and like cowboy's wheelbarrow with a shed on, and all these hundreds of soldiers were behind it, and they were supposed to be coming to attack us. And believe it or not, we finished up playing them at football. They were on the way round, and somehow or other we talked to them and we played them at football. I can't remember the result, but you can imagine all them hundreds picking a team from them, and there were 15 of us. But that's how it happened. And that's where we stayed in Trieste. Now, when we were in Trieste, we used to go into Trieste and enjoy ourselves because peace had broke out, and we used to go down into the Trieste and into a cafe and have egg and chips and that kind of thing, and we used to spend our little time down there. It was quite nice. But finally we were allowed to come home on leave after about 4 years abroad, away from our homes, and we came back by train through Switzerland, France, and across the Channel and back home.